lifers, sending aid to the victims of Bosnia. Tragedies that touch even the hardest hearts. Now, David Taylor is Deputy Governor at Nottingham Jail, where half the inmates are lifers. He's got involved in delivering aid to Bosnia and says the terrible sights he's seen there have changed him and many of the people he governs.
The 4-year war in the former Yugoslavia ended last year. Like most people, David Taylor didn't fully understand what it was all about, and he'd never previously been involved in any form of charity work.
An ex-colleague came to see me one day and asked me to buy some raffle tickets, and I inquired into what it was, and next thing I actually found myself driving a lorry to Croatia.
Since that first trip, he's been back twice to the town of Banja Luka in Bosnia. David led the last convoy of 10 vehicles carrying £500,000 worth of aid: food, clothing, medical supplies and toys. One of the first stops was the orphanage.
You pick up a little boy and you hold him and he grabs you and he won't let go, because what you're giving him is what he needs most, and that's a few moments love and affection. And it's very difficult to leave the orphanage when you see how much you can give but how short a time you've got to give it. And you've got children there tied in cots, because if you don't, they'll injure themselves or get out. The word cot is an exaggeration. It's more like a cage that the children are in. Virtually no bedding in the cage at all.
The convoy also had an unscheduled stop at a large ditch, littered with brass bullet cases, a mass grave which had just been cleared of its corpses. People who'd been lined up, tortured and shot. As we were walking away from there, we walked past some barns which had been turned into open-air mortuaries. We saw 181 bodies that had been exhumed, from sort of a 14-year-old child to an 89-year-old woman who could never have done anybody any harm. The exhumed remains of people who had been decapitated and all sorts of sort of horrific stuff. I mean, frankly, it just stunned us to silence. We just couldn't believe it. The stench was overwhelming. And that actually became more apparent as one sort of walked away from it, when you realised that the smell, in a sense, came with you. Still moved by what he'd witnessed, the governor decided to share what happened with his staff and the prisoners.
He came back and spoke about it up in the chapel. And it was obvious that he'd been moved quite deeply by what he'd seen.
Jim Monaghan is serving a life sentence for murder. He admits he was surprised at how deeply the governor has been affected.
In prison, we don't see the real people. We see prisoners, we see staff, we see governors. We don't see each other as people. We're all dehumanized. It's a hostile world. It's a very cynical world. It's very suspicious. Everyone's suspicious of each other. I've been in prison 12 years, and I know personally a dozen people. I could name you a dozen people who've committed suicide in those 12 years. I know them personally, you know. So in that respect, prison can be psychologically quite hard.
But no matter how tough the prisoners think jail is, it can't compare with the horrors of Bosnia, as graphically described by David Taylor.
The way people perceive him as a person perhaps has been enhanced by revealing the fact. I mean, he was obviously moved. I mean, he was quite upset when he was talking about the orphanage and the mass grave. 180 bodies all decomposing, and all the relatives wandering about trying to identify people by their clothes. And for someone to explain that, to talk about that, and to be visibly moved, it's quite a powerful thing, you know. Even in here.
I think if you're the deputy governor of a prison, in a prison about this size, you have a high profile to start with, because you can't operate effectively as the deputy governor unless you have got a high profile. So I don't think it's altered fundamentally the profile of myself in the prison. I think what it's actually given some of the inmates, especially those who attended church when I talked to them, maybe they've seen another side that they thought might be there but hadn't witnessed it. Hello, McAlpines. Andrew White, please.
I understood where Bosnia was, but I didn't understand the problems that were there. I don't fully now, but we were all very touched by Mr. Taylor's talk on Bosnia and his work, that we felt that we'd like to join in and make some simple toys for the kids there.
Hello, R&G. Is Mick there, please? Mick, OK. And you got a part fill it with aid like the last one?
As well as 50 toy lorries, the workshop carpenters have made a doll's house, which will be auctioned to raise cash for the next convoy, which is planned for September.
The people in Bosnia, it's hardly actions, their own actions, that have put themselves in that unfortunate situation, where I'm afraid in prison a lot of our actions have been our own deliberate fault, our own stupidity, our own weakness.
Good morning, Paul Farms. The diesel last time was superb. How's about the same again? Yes, I know I've got a cheek, but I can only survive if I've got a cheek. The most poignant thing that was said actually by the director of the orphanage was, it's not what you've brought, it's the fact that you've come back. And we're very grateful for that, because it shows you actually care. It's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult to raise the money to do it. But we will go again. We desperately want to try to go in September. But between now and then, we've got to raise £15,000 to put the convoy on the road. Hopefully that next time around, having come back with a no claims bonus, we might be able to get it a bit cheaper, because we've proved we can do it and not bend anything, or at least not tell them we have. What drives us to do it again is we realise that we can make a difference, albeit for a short time, with these children and with these disadvantaged people. And if people like us, we're not the only ones, if people like us don't do it, who else is going to?
Well, David and the prisoners are still struggling to raise the money to enable them to go back to Bosnia. We wish them well. Well, it's time now to take another break.